Hey guys, welcome to webinar. We're here today to talk about building the ultimate Martech stack for 2022. Super excited to be here. Guys, we just wait a couple of moments for people to get on and we'll just let everybody take their seats. As I like to say, it's a little bit different in the digital world for people to take their seats, but we'll let people take their seats. This, of course, is a webinar that's being run by Marmind. I've got a really special guest on here today. Hi, Scott. Great to have you on, mate.
It is terrific to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. It's a pleasure. It's an honor, actually. We're looking forward to getting kicked off now in just a moment. I'm just going to check to see how many people we have on. The numbers are rising there nicely. So we'll just give people another couple of minutes, Scott, before we get kicked off properly, if that's okay for you. And yeah, be interested, just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin, guys. Please, if you want to ask any questions throughout the webinar, we will be doing a Q&A towards the end. Any questions that you can think of throughout, please pop them into the Q&A tab, which you will find in the bar above on your Zoom. If you want to just as well tell us in the chat box where you guys are located, that'd be great as well. It'd be really interesting to see where we have people dialing in from today. I know Scott's dialing in from the US this evening. I'm dialing in from Vienna and Austria. So I think we have a nice mix of people from all over Europe and the US. So it'd be great to see where people are dialing in from. Netherlands, where we have somebody on from Bulgaria. Good to see we've got a bit of a European following here today. We've got an American living in Slovakia. So good to see. Okay, guys, as I said, if you have any questions, please pop them into Q&A and we will get to them. But let's push on in the interest of time. The reason why we're talking about building a Martech stack today is if you look at the landscape, and this is something that Scott has put together, and he'll get into this in a bit further detail. But if you look at the overall landscape in 2020, it's crazy the amount of tools and technology that are available. So over 8,000 total solutions out there, and it's probably grown since then, I'm guessing, right? Which for marketers is super confusing. It's actually something that was built to solve a challenge for marketers, is probably causing more of a challenge for marketers in terms of what technology do I need? Where do I start? Does it all connect to one another? What type of resource do I need in order to implement it? How do I prioritize it? All of these types of questions are things that me as a marketer come up all of the time, and it's thinking, okay, how long will it take to even implement this piece of technology, and will that piece of technology talk with that piece of technology? And when I have that, what information am I actually taking from that that's actually going to be able to make sense of as a marketer, right? All of these different things are questions that hopefully Scott will be able to answer to a certain extent today. Of course, we don't have that much time in order to be able to answer all of those questions, so Scott, no pressure, mate. But at the same time, I think these are topics that are applicable to every marketer, whether or not you're starting on your Martech stack build, or whether or not you're in the middle of it, or you already have a comprehensive stack. Regardless of where you are there, I think it's the same questions coming up from every marketer that I know. It's like, where do I prioritize? What resource do I need? Where do I go next? How do I take the data out? How do I make sense of the data, right? So with that, I've been mentioning Scott a couple of times, but before we get into this, we just want to run a quick poll just quickly, just to figure out what type of priority you guys have as for your tech stack for 2022. So if we could just share that poll now quickly, and we'll give people, I don't know, 20 seconds or so to answer. So we'll give people just another moment or two. Okay, I believe people have been able to answer that poll, so I think we can close the poll. We can see that, okay, high priority for 62% of the audience has said that it's a high priority, 31% saying medium, and 8% are saying low. So only one person answered it was a low priority. So we're going to go with the high and medium and say, okay, building a tech stack for 2022 is a high priority for most of our audience on today, Scott. So that gives a good leeway into introducing you and your background, Scott. So let me run down through the highlights, right? And then I'll let you take over and speak because people are hearing my voice way too much now. So Scott is a keynote speaker at conferences all around the world, and his thinking really influences CMOs, senior leaders in marketing, and how to build tech stacks. He's like, as we can see there from that last diagram that we've seen, this is one of the things that he's built out with the team over at Chief Martech, which is also the blog that he writes for. He's the editor there. He's not only a best-selling author from Hacking Marketing, but also is published author in the Harvard Business Review. And then in his spare time, it would seem, he's also the VP of Platform Ecosystem at a leading marketing and sales automation tool known as HubSpot. So Scott, I don't even know where to begin in terms of where you find the time to do all of those things, but we're super excited to have you on, like really, really excited to have you on. So yeah, I'm really, really happy to have you, mate.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, how do I fit this all into the time? It is all Martech all the time for me, 24/7. And so really looking forward here to talking a bit about this environment we have and yeah, really how you as a marketing leader can like frame a way of thinking through this to really turn all this Martech craziness out there to your advantage. So yeah, whenever you're ready, we'll take it away.
Perfect. I just realized I haven't introduced who I am, which is not the most important thing in this by far, but just a quick intro. So I'm currently working as CMO here at Marmind, focusing on getting the Marmind ecosystem up and running from a B2B perspective as well. And as a CMO myself, Scott, I'm super excited to hear your insights here because I think I can also learn a lot of things from you here today. So with that, without further ado, I'm going to hand everything over to you, Scott. We're going to give you the reins for the next 25 minutes or so. We'll let you get into it and then we'll get into a Q&A afterwards.
All right, that sounds great.
I'll stop sharing and then you can go ahead and share.
Ready to roll.
Scott, did you get kicked out there, mate? You're muted. You're muted. There
okay, I'm now back with you.
We can hear you. We cannot see your screen though.
Okay, and now can you see my screen? Okay.
Perfect. Perfect. And we're just after going down again. So my apologies, guys. I think Scott's having a couple of little technical difficulties there. Scott, everything going okay there, mate?
Yeah, for some reason it kept kicking me out here, but let's try this again. Are you now able to see this screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Let's pray.
Awesome. Well,
let's pray to the Zoom gods that it stays. I'll leave it over to you, mate.
All right, awesome. So as I was getting ready to say, yeah, the growth of this MarTech landscape over the past decade has been really wild. When I first started studying this category in 2011, at the time I found around 150 different marketing technologies out there, which frankly, at the time seemed like a tremendous number, like, oh my goodness, 150 marketing technology solutions. How would you ever keep track of them all? And then year over year, just the growth of vendors and solutions and all these innovative ideas in the space exploded quite literally exponentially. We're talking about over a 10-year time period, 5,233% growth. And we could do a whole webinar on the dynamics which created this environment. But the reality is for marketers, this is a bit of the best of times and the worst of times. The best of times is, yes, we have all these companies out here who are investing all this energy, and creativity in innovating new ways for us to, engage with our audience and to optimize how our business runs. But on the other side of it, yes, just being able to navigate this and make sure we can harness these capabilities is no trivial challenge unto itself. And this challenge is frankly going to keep growing in the sense that Mark Andreessen said, 10 years ago, software is eating the world. Very prescient. Software is indeed eating the world. And it's not just marketing technology applications, commercially available. I mean, all sorts of different SaaS categories. And then there's all of the custom software, everything from like what you build for a particular web app or your mobile apps, or maybe some sort of internal app, in your business. More and more of these applications are growing. And our challenge really becomes, as marketers, how do we harness all of that power in a coherent way? I find myself often thinking, actually, that we have made a really fundamental shift in what the challenge of modern digital business is. For the past 10 years, when people were talking about digital, the challenge that usually got raised was, oh my goodness, we have to deal with big data. Big data being defined as like, all this volume and velocity and variety of all this data being pulled into our organization. In fact, frankly, just figuring out the challenge of where we would store all of that data, much less what we would do with it, was a pretty meaty hurdle to overcome. But the truth is, we've now largely overcome the fundamental ability to have big data. And we're now shifting into an era where the challenge is much more what we do with this data. That it's all the operations capabilities that are being layered on top of this data foundation. So now it's actually the volume and velocity and variety of all these different apps and algorithms and agents and automations and analyses that we are running in this environment. There's a visual metaphor I have for this where, if I think of the age of big data, it was like this faraway data lake that you needed a professional guide data scientist to, hike up into the mountains and peer into its depths for wisdom. Today's environment for big ops, well, yeah, it's still this huge volume of water, huge volume of data, but it's now much more like this interactive water park that's accessible. Like everyone is in the company is now participating in this, and it's a lot more fun, but it's also a lot more challenging. Just how do we keep everyone aligned on the work we're doing together in this environment? The amount of data in the world does continue to grow exponentially. We're going to be up to, IDC predicts like 175 zettabytes by 2025. In case if you're wondering, a zettabyte is equal to, well, if you had a high definition movie, I mean like the 4K super ultra high definition movie, a zettabyte would be 30 billion of those. So wow, I talk about a Netflix binge you got going on there. So I mean, and in the context of us in marketing, right? I mean, this isn't. This is such an incredible amount of this that's now coming into our purview. It's all these different digital touch points that we have with customers and prospects that are generating more and more data, and richer data sets too, of being able to peer more deeply into the interactions, that our audiences are having with us. And so the key word there is really interactions, because this shift from big data to big ops is very much about not just the scale of data, but the scale of interactions, which are actually growing faster than the total amount of data in the world. I mean, the average IDC expects, in a few years, the average person will have 5,000 interactions with data every day. And some of this will be internal, how we run our own marketing operations teams and our interactions with data. But also it's about how we surface up the experiences that are data-driven experiences to customers as well, too. Getting our arms around all this data and operations that's flowing through us kind of gets us into the world of the Martech stack. And what you see on the screen here is a collection of entries that marketers over the years have sent into an awards program I run called the Stackies, where I invite marketers to illustrate on a single slide what they see as their Martech stack. Not just the particular tools they're using, but sort of how they visualize all these pieces fitting together. And over the years, yeah, I mean, literally hundreds of companies, you know, in all industries of all sizes have sent in stacks. So if you Google Martech stackies, you know, there's a great set to go through. But the real question becomes, how do we take advantage of this? We know that the number of apps in each, you know, in our companies is growing. There's a SaaS management platform called Blissfully that put together a report that actually analyzed, you know, the business tech stacks, you know, of hundreds and hundreds of companies, you know, and they found even small businesses on average could have 102 apps. You know, you start to get into mid-sized companies, it's more like 200. As you get up to larger companies of 1,000 or more, it's not usual to even have 300 apps, you know, in our ecosystem. But, you know, as Andy said at the beginning here, it's like, how do we turn this to our advantage? You know, I mean, I think one of the challenges we've often felt with this mushrooming, you know, of Martech stacks is that at some level, they just felt fragile, you know, that, you know, anytime like new apps would get added, or if we had to swap one app for another app, you know, just this concern of like, oh my goodness, are we going to break the process of how this stuff works together? And so what Andy and I are really excited to talk with you about is, you know, almost how we start to shift through a combination of process and management and technology to have a more anti-fragile stack environment. Whereas we add new data or we add new apps, it's actually a way of strengthening the capabilities for our company.
I'm going to put in here real quick, Scott. I think this is a good opportunity for it to just throw in our next poll, which is around how your current stack setup in terms of how solid it would be, if it's solid, somewhat stable, or weak. So we'll give people just a moment. And sorry for the big intro there, by the way.
That's a great question.
So we'll give people just another couple of seconds to get answering, and then we'll see what the results look like. But just looking at those awards, the entries for those awards, by the way, it's crazy. I seen like 28 apps being used with 7 employees or something, or 7 developers, 28 apps. I think, oh dear.
Yeah, well, yeah, software has indeed eaten the world.
Absolutely. Wild. Okay, we'll maybe close that poll now. I think people have had enough time to answer, and we'll see where we're at with that. So somewhat stable. That's an interesting 77% of people say that their tech stack or current setup is somewhat stable, with only 15% saying weak, 8% saying solid. Clearly, I know, and I barely know any company that would say that their tech stack is completely solid. You might disagree with me there. You might know plenty that are completely solid, but I've never met a company that said their tech stack is solid. I don't know what your experience is there, Scott.
Well, I think it is definitely a fluid environment, you know, and really, yeah, that becomes one of the things that I think we're all striving for. It's not that we're ever going to reach a place, at least not anytime soon, where we can say, okay, this tech stack is done. These are the apps. This is the data. We can just use this exact set of capabilities for the next 5 years. We're done. Check. You know, just because there are so many changes that keep happening out in the market, you know, new channels that customers are engaging with us, new tactics, new regulations and compliance in the environment in which we work, that all these changes continually happen, that we just have to embrace a world where solid for our tech stack means, you know, it's got a stable foundation, but it's also capable of evolving as new needs come up. So this is actually a really good segue to talk about the first step of actually making sure, you know, we have a stable environment that grows from, you know, gets stronger as we add new apps, you know, and that's really addressing this issue of integration between these apps, you know, and I don't want to get too technical on this, but I feel for marketing leaders, it's really important, you know, when you are evaluating products to bring into your, you know, department, to be able to understand how they integrate with your other apps. You know, and if you just ask someone like, does application A integrate with application B? The answer today is almost always yes. There's probably some way in the cloud to connect the two. But the thing that's really important to keep in mind is not all integrations are created equal. There are actually many different layers in which we can think about, how well things integrate. One level is, again, just this, what we typically think of integration, which is data. Like, okay, well, how do we make sure we're, sharing the data between two different apps? And even in that mode, you can have the difference between, well, are we sending things one way? Are we synchronizing things two way? What sort of controls are in place to make sure that the data, is clean and, that exception management is well handled. And then we start thinking about like, oh, well, what about the workflow? As experiences happen across multiple apps, how easy is it to orchestrate that, to sequence it? There's this level of thinking about UI integration, that when I'm working primarily in one particular app, how easy is it for me to see other aspects of relevant apps in that environment? And then ultimately thinking about governance around integrations, just making sure that every piece of our stack is able to meet, our SLAs, from a performance and uptime perspective, but also issues around security and data privacy and compliance as well too. And so my number one advice is people are evaluating, products for their Martech stack, is to really push on the question of integration and understanding how that works. But I want to step back a bit, because for all the power that this technology offers you, to me, 80% of being successful with Martech isn't the technology. It really is the people and the process we implement around this. And there's a framework I want to share with you of called the new rules of marketing technology and operations. 5 very simple rules. First, centralize everything you can. Second, automate everything you can. All right, wait. Third, decentralize everything you can. And then fourth, humanize everything you can. Oh, and continually embrace change. Now, if you're looking at this list and you're thinking to yourself, wait a second. First of all, you wouldn't be the only person to have that reaction. Augie Ray, a distinguished analyst at Gartner, when I'd shared this with him, he said, you just put automate everything you can and humanize everything you can, 2 places from each other. I can't decide if that's funny or sad. Okay, well, thank you, Augie. To which I would reply, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. And I think this actually is the trick to modern marketing technology and operations leadership, is we're really looking to balance on these 2 different axes, the capabilities that we centralize and the importance in having that sort of structure, but also our ability to decentralize and empower other people throughout our organization to self-service more opportunities. On the other axis here, really thinking about, yes, we want to be able to leverage technology as much as we can to automate, to harness this power, of digital operations, but we can't lose touch with the human dimension of what actually makes marketing successful, what creates empathy, what creates like brand in the mind of our customers. And it's not just humanizing from a customer experience perspective, although that's certainly incredibly important. It's also making sure we're humanizing from an internal employee experience perspective too. And so as you start to think about your marketing technology stack, again, it's partly about the technology, but it's more about this framework of how do we balance the ability to scale with the ability to retain agility, to make changes, run experiments, adapt to new opportunities. How do we balance this dance between people and technology? And I find it interesting that actually, if you take these 2 axes and, and you overlay them here in a 2x2, you end up with like these 4 quadrants that I think really speak to 4 missions that marketing technology and operations is looking to serve. Now the first one of these, in the upper left, efficiency, of how do we use technology to centralize more data, to centralize, more systems. This is great. This is where we get a tremendous amount of efficiency. And when you think about marketing operations, this is probably the quadrant, we tend to think of as like, oh, well, that's what marketing operations does. And it is super important to make sure that, we're not just standardizing the tools, but we're standardizing the data structures and we're standardizing the process. How are we tracking things, that are happening, all the activity, all the resource investment that's happening across marketing. We're accelerating the speed and scale by which that can happen with this technology, but we can't lose track of the visibility of it and really the understanding of how all these pieces work. So yes, the efficiency of technology and scalability there is phenomenal, but that is only one piece of it. The second part, if we sort of shift over here to the right, about decentralized capabilities with technology, this is really about how we feed innovation. It's about how do we let individual teams perhaps run their own local experiments and campaigns, perhaps be able to even, my goodness, bring their own specialized tool to do a very specialized function that they need that isn't part of the global stack. Giving people a certain amount of this flexibility can be incredibly powerful for just allowing, innovation to happen. The key is it has to connect back to that centralized, system. We need to make sure that, yes, if you're running these experiments or you're running these variations or you're running your own specialized tool, that nonetheless the visibility and the data and the process continues to come back to a cohesive, centralized system. But this is just the top half from a technology perspective. And I really can't overemphasize, how important the bottom half of this 2x2 is, which is how do we really engage people to get the most advantage of this? And if we think about like the humanizing of the decentralized portion, one of the things that I think this does is really let us empower individual, not just marketers, but salespeople and customer service people, to be able to best serve the customer in individual situations. One of the things we want to be careful about for all the beauty of automation, and all this acceleration, that automation can bring, we want to make sure that, whenever an individual customer, ends up in some sort of situation where the automation or the self-service digital technologies aren't addressing what they need, that it's really easy for them to be able to get in touch and reach another human being. And just as importantly, that human being is empowered in a way to be able to help them and resolve the situation well. I think this is, I label this quadrant authenticity, because this really, for all the fun stuff we'll talk about with brand, it is those one-to-one engagements, those individual, moments we have with customers where the authenticity of our brand either shines or doesn't. But then, yeah, sort of pulling back there, to the centralized part of this, obviously, speaking to a group of marketers, more about brand than, I would ever be able to, attempt to capture, except to say that the reason I put this here, all these issues around our global mission and understanding our customer code, how do we want customers to be treated? How do we understand our culture code? How do we want our teams to work internally? These are actually issues that are incredibly relevant to the marketing technology and operations team too, because it is these technologies and these processes that we put in place, that really define the environment where the brand becomes real. So one last thing I just wanted to, close out with on that is, again, for all the technology and all the innovation that's happening there, the real magic I've seen again and again for what makes companies successful with their Martech stack versus frustrated with their Martech stack is the investment they make in process and the investment they make in people. And just one data point on that, I think is very relevant to it is a number of you have probably heard of, agile marketing, this adoption of agile management techniques, many of which, emerged in the world of software development, a couple decades ago, but have proven to be highly relevant for almost any kind of, digital management activity. These agile management approaches to getting things done, to empowering teams while at the same time providing structure around them. The group Agile Sherpas that measures, does a lot of research on agile marketing adoption. Just this past year, for the first time, more than half of the companies they engaged with, reported that they had at least some parts of an agile marketing approach in 2021. So hopefully just, again, re-emphasize one more time, the technology is great, but the real success with your Martech stack is the people and process capabilities you put around that.
100%. I think that gives us a good leeway now into our next poll, which is just why you're interested in developing a tech stack. And this goes back to the past couple of moments of what you've just been speaking about there, Scott. We'll give people just a couple of minutes or a couple of moments to answer that question. But it's funny that you mentioned agile in marketing, and I think to a lot of marketers, to me, agile can be a scary word when it comes to marketing, because if you work in the startup world, agility sometimes means doing all of the things and not complaining about doing all of the things. So I think it's up to marketing leaders as well. I really like the way that you put it, in that it was parts of the marketing process are agile, in that because the technology is fluid, you need to adapt quickly to changes, right? Some marketing leaders misinterpret that and think of agile marketing as being to change the direction that the team is running in every 25 minutes. Right?
Not a good idea. Yes,
no, for sure not. For sure not. But I really like your take on how agile marketing is a part of the marketing process. It's nice. I like it. That will close out that poll and see what people had to say there. So all of the above. So most people are saying, okay, automate, centralize, and scale. So no big surprises there. But automation is the second one. I think most people that I speak to, if you're going to ask them why they're looking at bringing in more technology, it's typically around the automation side of things. They want to move away from doing things manually. I would say, though, that in a lot of cases, it sometimes creates more work to automate things than it does to do things manually in some cases. I have some examples, but I think the automation thing is something that I've seen quite a lot of over the past couple of years. I guess you've seen the same, Scott, right?
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point. Automation, I should have brought a slide I have of, if you remember the movie Fantasia, and the Sorcerer's Apprentice, Mickey Mouse, the wizard, goes away for the day, and Mickey Mouse, the apprentice, uses the wand to have the broom magically start doing chores for him. Oh, automation is great. I love automation, but then what happens is, that broom that was getting buckets of water, as a chore, all of a sudden, all the brooms, start getting buckets of water, and they just keep doing this again and again. And the whole wizard's castle starts flooding over. And the thing about that I think is really remarkable is it really hits on a point here. Yes, automation can be our friend, but if we start blindly automating things without really understanding the impact that has on customers, most of all, but even also our own internal teams, yeah, it's really easy to go from, oh, wow, that's a wonderful thing, to oh my goodness, this is a catastrophe, And again, this sort of comes back to why I feel like process is ultimately the thing, that really makes a Martech stack successful or not. Because if you have a clear handle on your processes, then you really have a good understanding of where you can automate and, to what extent, where there should be human judgment and where there should be automation. And I guess actually with that, before I hand this back to you, I just wanted to share this quote from Daryl Alfonso, who runs marketing operations at Amazon Web Services, is a good friend. But I thought he really captured this very well, because the work that goes in to building these stacks and managing them, the role of marketing, tech, and operations right now, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of work. And I just always want to make sure that, particularly for CMOs in our audience here, that we celebrate and appreciate the work of what these members of our team are doing. Because as Daryl said, operations isn't, quote, back office work. At least not anymore. I mean, great operations, because it has such an impact on everything we do, ultimately being delivered to customers through marketing. Great operations is a differentiator. And so with that, I'm going to turn slides back to you, Andy. And oh, you might be on mute.
You can hear me again.
There you are. Okay.
You got me. So yeah, apologies. I was talking.
We're having a fun Zoom day, aren't we?
I know, man. There's always something. So just before we get into the Q&A side of things, it's just one of the things that we were speaking beforehand about was this particular slide here, Scott. And I don't want to go too deep into what Marmind have to offer and so on. People aren't here to hear that, but we do recognize 7 core areas of the entire marketing process, starting with planning, budgeting, content, products, publishing, analytics, results. And within each of those different areas, processes, are pieces of technology that are stacked, almost like mini stacks for each of those different areas, right? And what we see is the most important thing is being able to connect all the dots from one end of the process to the other. But this is where organizations such as Marmind, for example, help connect all of those dots and act as all like the glue that connects everything in between. Now, before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to get into, because you've been speaking about processes now for a couple of moments or a couple of minutes almost. And the way that we see the world in the marketing resource management side of things is always all focused on that marketing process and about creating this best in breed amount of technology, which enables that end-to-end process. And I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions, or just one question. Where do you see the marketing resource management topic or category fit into the overall tech stack? Where's the place for it?
Yeah, to me, it's one of those foundational capabilities. I mean, we certainly tend to think a lot about customer-centric systems in our stack, like, oh, okay, well, what's our CRM? What's our marketing automation platform? What is our CMS or digital experience platform? And these are important pieces, to think about, but again, it's all the activities that happen on the other side, inside marketing, to connect these dots and to make things happen. That getting that running, particularly as you start to scale as an organization and make sure you're connecting process and budget in the way in which the data associated with all this, is standardized and has a visibility to it for people to just make good decisions from a leadership perspective, and also, the individual teams working with this. Yeah, I mean, so what is your system, that is helping to orchestrate all that? That is marketing resource management. And if that is a piece of the puzzle that you've not thought enough about, I would highly recommend, stepping back and looking for you as a marketer. Where do you spend your day, and what are the sorts of questions you have, and what are the sorts of things that become challenges in making decisions for what you and your team do? I suspect you'll find that actually a lot of those things, all those roads lead you back to like, oh, well, how good of a handle do we actually have on our marketing resource management?
Perfect. Thanks for that. Okay, and without further ado, then we'll go into a Q&A. And just we've got one question from the audience so far, guys. If you have any further questions, please feel free to throw those questions into the Q&A tab. You'll find just in the Zoom bar there. So Jeff has asked a question, just speaking of process and brand management. Scott, how critical do you see the stack, including digital asset management?
Absolutely. It's one of those fundamental data elements, and again, this is one of these things where I think it can sometimes be, we can sometimes be guilty, I can sometimes be guilty, of thinking so much about customer data, because there's been so much focus, on that, so many changes in the environment around that. But when you think about it, our content, our assets, that is almost really the second pillar. It's like, in fact, I guess you put it as like 3 pillars. It's the pillar of the actual customer data, as we were just talking about here on MRM, there's the pillar of data of how we're actually operating, which ties back very closely to like our financial data systems of record, But then there's the content, there's the assets, like what is the master set of this? How are we tracking it? How are we managing it? How are the updates for it? I would argue probably DAM is an unsung hero, in most Martech stacks today, but a very important one.
Got it. Okay, the next question comes from Kirill, and it's about how are marketing resource management IPAAS related or dependent on each other. Both seem to be around standardizing and managing processes, but are distinct and separate tools.
Well, I think iPaaS is it's a fascinating category. So if I sort of step back, that evolution of the MarTech landscape, nobody saw that coming. Well, all right, I've yet to meet anyone who's seen that coming. In fact, I will confess, I did not see it coming, this like year over year exponential growth. And so again, while the advantage of that was all this incredible creation of capabilities for marketers, you know, when this explosion of MarTech first happened, there was very little integration being built in between these different products. And so that actually created a whole category of products called integration platform as a service, you know, dozens of vendors, you know, in that space whose whole mission was like, oh, well, we'll make it easier for you to connect, you know, data and trigger workflows across different apps. Now, what's happened is over the past few years, you know, people have collectively agreed that, yes, integration is a first-class citizen. Like if you can't get things integrated, you know, then yeah, you know, that becomes a real barrier, you know, to just being able to execute internal or external, you know, campaigns or experiences. And so I think what you've seen is more and more integration capabilities built natively into products. Most products now, you know, have very good integrations, you know, to the apps that they're relevant to. But there's still a world for iPaaS because, yeah, just the universe of the apps is very, very large. There's a very long tail there. And so if your, you know, foundational platform doesn't have a native integration to a particular, you know, long tail app, you can at least always be certain that, yeah, you can leverage an iPaaS tool to one way or another bring that data in.
Yeah, and just to add to that in terms of how MRM and iPaaS would be related, within MRM, there's like the MRM tool would have a lot of those standard integrations that you just mentioned there, Scott. So for example, integrations to ERP systems, or when you're talking around budgeting, or integrations to planning tools, like for example, Microsoft 365 is a simple example, or even to Slack, for example. There will be out-of-box integrations there. And I think you made a very good point there as well, Scott. I think the power nowadays in a lot of tools is the out-of-box integrations that they offer, instead of you actually having to go and create an integration yourself. As a marketer, I've had to do that quite often. So a simple example would be using Zapier as that iPaaS system in between to be able to create an integration between two different platforms. If I look at HubSpot, the company that you're currently working for, HubSpot is really interesting, and I think they started this very early on, is to create seamless integrations with some of the larger players in the space. Simple example will be with Salesforce. So HubSpot and Salesforce, it's almost like they're one tool together. How well that integration works between both. And I know that as a marketer, having used it myself. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting question. So thank you for that, Kirill. I have some questions, and please feel free, guys, to add any more questions into the Q&A tab as we go here. But I've got some questions for you, Scott, and I'm actually just going to stop sharing my screen so that we can talk face to face a little bit better here. So just in terms of some of the failures that you see when people or companies are starting to build their stack, what are some of the real giveaways when people are making mistakes? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, and again, I have a lot of empathy that this is still a pretty new field, you know, and this is a lot of net new capability and responsibility for marketing. And it's not like any of the responsibilities that marketing previously had have gone away. Like all the things we were responsible for as marketing leaders 10 years ago, we're still responsible for all of that. It's just we've added these additional layers on top of it. So, you know, if you feel a little bit behind on this, trust me, you're not alone. You know, this is a big hill to climb. But I would say probably the single most common mistake I see is the investment being made in the tools without the commensurate investment being made in the people and the process. You know, and I keep bringing back to this. I know I was sort of beating that, you know, drum heavily throughout my slides, but it's real. You know, I mean, these technologies have such incredible capabilities, you know, but we don't instantly like just buy it and like the matrix plug in and absorb, oh, okay, I know Kung Fu, I know how to do this. Like there really is this process of learning how to use these tools, really adapting the way we run marketing to be able to harness what these new capabilities are. And so this is a real investment. It might not be signing a PO, but it's allocating time on teams to be able to learn how to use these things well, to have the space to experiment, with how to use them well, and learn the practices that aren't just industry best practices, but what are the best practices for your specific organization? So allocate for that accordingly.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting. And you raised a point at the start of that answer there, just around maybe just jumping into technology too quickly and being like, okay, it's going to solve all of our problems now. We just, we'll take it on. We've spent the money, we've budgeted it. It's okay. We're good to go. Why aren't we seeing the world change? Right now, my experience there is that it boils down to two things. If you haven't done the research beforehand, you're probably, or if you haven't put enough time into the buying process, you may end up with a tool that you don't need, right? If you haven't thought about it as a priority within the rest of your stack, for example. But it's also with 8,000 plus solutions on the market, there are a lot of companies out there that are selling the dream and maybe not delivering it, right? And one of the areas that I'm starting to see now, though, is that's changing. Just personally, I'm seeing it just because I'm interested in the tech space. I'm seeing a change with companies, for example, such as Gong, who give exactly what their software provides exactly what it says on the tin, and their valuation is showing that, right? They're showing so much traction. So what are you seeing? Because I've been investing in technology for years, and I'm invested in tools where I'm like, this is just really not doing what it said it was going to do. Are you seeing a tide change there at all with technology getting better and better?
I think in general, and there's one sort of like overriding factor there that helps move us in that direction. And that is the fact that, these businesses are all subscription businesses. And it used to be when there weren't great integrations and there weren't great platforms and open data and things like this. If you got stuck in a subscription and it wasn't doing what it promised, yeah, it could take you a while before you were able to get off of it. But as the world has become more open and more integrated, that's actually given you more optionality. That if you buy a tool and it doesn't deliver on what it was promised, your options to be able to jettison that and move to something else are increasing quite significantly. And this is a good thing, not because you want to switch tools all the time, but because it creates the incentive structure to make sure that vendors are delivering value to you, both what they initially promised, but that they also continue to evolve with you and meet your ongoing needs. So I think that's a really healthy change for the industry. It's not perfect yet, it's not universal yet, but it's headed in that direction. And I think everyone benefits.
Sure. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Let's bring it back a little bit to process, because we've been speaking a lot about process and how having a solid process in place will ultimately see you being successful with the tech stack that you've built. But how do you even start to build that internal process, even around the decision? We just spoke about like making decisions on which technology to invest in. How do you prioritize which technology to invest in? And then building the process. Where does the process come into that? Because process needs to be built somewhere. Does it happen before you invest in the technology? Does it happen when you invest in the technology? Do you build the process first and then look at which technology is needed in order to bring the process further? Like, where do you start?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the reality is process exists, right? Like, you've got a team, you've got people, they come to work, they're doing things, and whatever they're doing, that is your process, So really the question becomes, how standardized is that process? How optimized is that process? And perhaps even, most importantly, is how visible is that process? How clear is it, to you as a marketing leader, what that activity flow looks like? And this requires a bit of anthropology, if you haven't already done this, to be able to dig into the work that your teams are doing and just understand the flow of their day-to-day activity. And a bunch of that flow may be manual steps, and to your point earlier, Andy, it's not like we have to automate everything, out of the box, but even those things that are manual steps, we still want to understand that process. And this is why I feel like one of the best investments, a marketing team can make is in having a really good marketing operations leader on the team. This is a discipline unto itself. One of the great things about marketing, we were talking earlier about how the scope of responsibilities in marketing have, grown quite prodigiously, over this past decade. It has more than ever made marketing a team sport. There's not like, one person in marketing who is just brilliant at every aspect, of what marketing needs to do. And so you want strengths that are in different, leaders on the team collectively together. And I think just recognizing that, operations management, is one of those specialties that you want someone there who really loves that, really loves understanding and mapping this out. And it isn't just an analytical thing, but it's got enough of the, empathy and human dimension that they're able to work with the marketers who are actually doing these things and understand it and, be able to figure out like, oh, wow, is there a way we could like save you a couple steps here? Like, oh, what's the most painful piece of this? What part of this do you hate doing? What's the slog? How do I find this out? What's the visibility from a data perspective that you wish you had the answer to, but, I don't know where I would find that. Having a great operations leader who can really do that sort of anthropological splunking and start to map out your process. That's just a huge advantage that is, I fear, too often underappreciated still, in the broader marketing industry.
I think, from where I was standing, I've been with a number of organizations and numerous sizes of marketing teams. Marketing operations is still a pretty under-resourced function within marketing orgs. The tide is changing, as with a lot of things, but typically, would you have seen that marketing operations role be maybe in a different team? For example, in a biz ops team, business operations team, perhaps that would be more of a, as you said, an analytical role, somebody that's crunching numbers and then maybe giving feedback to the marketing team. Hey, maybe you should be looking at X, Y, Z, or perhaps even under the financial org.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's certainly, different people have worn different hats, and there's still, frankly, a role, for business ops and analysts to play in their engagement with marketing. But I think what it comes down to is marketing practice is complex. There are just a lot of moving parts here. And to be honest, if you aren't fully dedicated into this to understand the operations of campaigns and, how this is working in these, advertising channels and how this tracks back to what we're doing on conversion optimization, on the website, and then how that flows through this process for qualifying leads and prioritizing them. I mean, there's just a lot there that is incredibly specific to the marketing domain. And I think it's very hard for someone who isn't 100% in that world and, really you got to really love this stuff, to be good at it. It's just hard to parachute in and say like, oh, well, I guess here's some high level data on this, or what was the ROI on this? Because it's more than just that layer. It is really the actual flow of activity and process there that I think great marketing ops people, trying to think of if you kind of imagine there being this like creek of, like water going through your digital marketing organization, it's great marketing ops people, like they're able to open up the dams and like really turn this into like a stream and a river. And it's magical when you see it happen.
I fully agree with that. I think as a marketer, having had conversations, for example, with finance, whereas like a different team, they don't have any feeling for it. They probably don't really care, right? Their focus is on something else. They're focused on a dollar amount. Whereas in a marketer's position, yes, the dollar amount is important, but it's not the core focus, right? And having worked with a marketing ops team before, it's different because they get their hands dirty within the marketing operations, let's call it. But as you said, in campaigns, the tools that marketing are using, how things are performing, like what does good look like from a marketing perspective, conversion rates within the marketing funnel, how that's then maybe leading down to sales and so on. Whereas finance are probably looking at one number at the top and one number at the bottom. and not really caring too much what's happening in between, right? And that's probably where it sort of, in my mind, it goes back to the thing I was showing before with this 7 stages in the process and how it's all connected, and each different stage there had different tech stacks included within it, right? And when I was looking at this before, I was thinking, this is actually makes a lot of sense to me, because in each stage, you're going to have in budgeting, for example, you're going to have ERP tools, which to marketers are just not interesting. You know, you're not going to get a marketer going in and using Sage Intacct, for example. However, you will have finance using that, and everything that's being budgeted from a spend perspective for marketing needs to be then somehow communicated back into their tool that's being used by finance. So again, this is connecting us back a little bit to the MRM piece again, is how do we connect those systems up? That's how, right? But it sort of reminded me of that being like, okay, it's 2 different worlds, but how do we connect those worlds?
Yeah.
And that's how we do it, right? But
well said.
yeah. Thanks. But yeah, so like if we're looking at, like, bring it back a little bit and try to keep it simple, maybe. If we're looking at like the most important thing to take into account when you start building your stack. I know you've been speaking about process. Is it process? Is that the most important thing to think about when you start out on your stack journey?
Well, I could probably spend 80% of my time talking people and process, and that would be the right ratio. And again, not just process, but from the people side, making sure they're enabled, to really have the time and the training to learn these things well. But since I know we were talking here about tech stacks, I will say the one tech piece that, if I could put it above everything else, and this won't come as a surprise given some of what we were talking about earlier, it's really evaluating vendors on their openness and their integrations. The early days of marketing technology, there were a lot of great pioneers in the space, but a lot of those systems were very closed, and we have now moved into an environment that I think is much better for a whole bunch of reasons. Of the expectation now is that systems are going to be open, and ideally they have a bunch of the right integrations you need, like right out of the box. But even if, there's something special you need that there's not an out-of-the-box integration for, just knowing that you have access to the data, you have visibility to it, the APIs are good. Even if you personally are not going to sit there and like, all right, well, I'm a CMO, I'm not going to write some JavaScript to call that API. That's fine. But you want to know those things exist so that if you need something and you want to bring someone in from your marketing ops team or someone from your IT team to be able to access, they can do that. Hold vendors accountable to this.
That's perfect. That's really, really good advice. And I think that with that, that's like my final question was, if you were to give one piece of advice to our audience today, what would it be? And I think that piece of it, you just gave a very valuable piece of advice there. So, but is there anything else as we finish here? What would be the one thing that you would say to people?
I think the one other piece of advice I would give is take a deep breath and step back. I know this whole marketing tech, marketing ops world, it's a lot to chew. And as I mentioned earlier, like, everyone's on a journey here. No one has mastered this yet. This is a very new and evolving field. And so, yeah, just take a deep breath that, you don't have to have all the answers, out of the box. Nobody does. And to also remember that, ultimately, all of this is a means to an end. Brands win because they deliver incredible experiences and value to their customers. And everything we're doing, with, technology and operations is just in the service of that, and I think this is the key responsibility of the CMO is to, yes, we want to create these capabilities. Yes, we want to empower these teams. Yes, we want to have the right tools. But the CMO really needs to keep, his or her organization focused on the big picture of how do we deliver customer value and delight. That's still the single most important thing that at the end of the day makes this work.
100%. Scott, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really great speaking with you, and I've learned a lot. Our audience has as well. And guys, if you want to find Scott, the best place to get you, I guess, on LinkedIn, right? Get following LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
You're also active on Twitter. I know that Johanna has shared your details here for LinkedIn. And also, if you want to go have a good read of the stuff that he's put out on chiefmartech.com, go ahead and do that. There's plenty of material to get through there. But but and really, really great. So I can't thank you enough, Scott. Really enjoyed this, and we hope to have you on again at some point in the future.
All right. Thanks so much for having me as your guest, Andy. Take care, everyone.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.